欢迎各位教亲再次来到我们这里，就是现在马上呢就是今天的最后的一个环节。那么这个环节呢，我们是有就是香港中文大学文化研究与宗教研究系的副监事教授来主讲，题目是伊斯兰和现代社会。副教授呢是来自于美国的穆斯林。那么副教授讲完之后呢，我可以做一个就是以普通话做一个摘要。Let us now invite Professor James Frankel to deliver the lecture on Islam and modern society. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for having me to present on this topic. I've been in Hong Kong now for just over a year, and I find it quite amusing that today I am the sole representative of local scholars in Hong Kong, although I've only been here for 1 year. Nevertheless, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you and to meet so many brothers and sisters from so many different places. In fact, this is really a reflection of our topic today: globalization, modernization, all of us coming together. So I've been asked to talk about Islam and modern society, and it's quite common these days, perhaps, to see an opposition between these ideas, Islam and modern. Sometimes we don't think these belong in the same breath or the same phrase. Some people think so, at least. I'd like to explore that idea and whether or not, in fact, there is a place for Islam in modern society and for the modern in Islam. But I think first we need to address our terms. One of the great, perhaps, reasons for this misunderstanding about the relationship between Islam and modern society or modern life is really a failure to apprehend the meaning of these words. In fact, I don't think there is just one single meaning, and this is part of the problem. So I'd like to discuss a range of meanings when it comes to both Islam and also modern society. This term modern, actually, people debate whether or not it's even relevant today, whether we are still living in the modern world or whether we're living in a postmodern world. So when we speak of modernity or the modern or modernism as an ideology or a worldview or a way of thinking, certain things come to mind immediately. A relationship of different phenomena over the last 200 to 300 years, which started in the Western world, yes, but today has become our common culture and our common heritage around the world. Now, many people will say that modernism or modernity is in fact the complete opposite of tradition, that it is the departure or the abandonment of tradition, that it represents a loss of traditional identity and heritage, as expressed here in this image, that it's actually a replacement for many traditional ways of life. In fact, modernization is really nothing other than a process. Okay? Maybe modernism has become an ideology, but it's based on a process. It's based on a developing form of first economy and then polity or politics, worldview. All of these things have developed in a more or less organic way from a common cause, which was in the West. And this was related, in fact, to the onset of industrialization. Okay, so we know that the Industrial Revolution in Europe and North America, which then later spread to other parts of the world, helped to bring about this modernization process. Together with industrialization came urbanization, right? I mean, we know these images, we live amidst these images of crowded, overpopulated places where people have had to come together for no natural reason except to share a common economic life, to contribute to this modern economy. But let's talk about urbanization for a moment. Let's talk about the numbers. Only 200 years ago, 2% of the world's population was urbanized. That means that 98% of the world's people, just 200 years ago, were living in rural areas, in the countryside. They were peasants, farmers, they were attached to the land. Today, the number of people living in urban centers, in cities, exceeds 50% of the human population for the first time in history. This is a huge transformation. In 1950, the urban population was less than 750 million people of the total world's population. By 2050, that figure is predicted to grow to 6.3 billion people. So this is a process which has become an overwhelming trend. Traditional ways of life simply don't exist in the volume or in the mass that they used to. And we have seen a complete transformation of the way that human beings live. This urbanization is widespread, and therefore it is part of the phenomenon of globalization. And globalization has brought people together in an unprecedented way. I mean, the networks of connection between people has never existed the way it does today. But I would also want to remind everyone that globalization is it's an ongoing process as well. In fact, we might say that it began as soon as human beings began to spread in the world. And that actually today's globalization is just an advanced stage of a process that took place or began actually when human beings first came out of whatever point of origin. The scientists say that this was somewhere in Africa, and then they spread throughout the world. Whatever it is, we are engaged in what we might say is a massive human family reunion, where human beings had been widespread in different parts of the world, had become separated, as the Quran says, into tribes and nations with different languages, different colors. And then gradually they have been coming back together. We have been reuniting, re-meeting. And actually there's no greater symbol of that than perhaps the annual Hajj. I mean, Islam itself has spread to every corner of the earth. And then once a year, by mandate of Allah, human beings must come back and reunite. So this globalization, as one of the earlier presenters said today, is actually something that is predicted and in fact encouraged in Islam. But we'll talk about that in a moment. The truth of the matter is, with industrialization, we've seen a huge increase in the development of science and technology. And this technology has also facilitated the urbanization, the globalization, the industrialization. It's a self-perpetuating system now. And with this technology, as the image, we see hundreds of images like this on the internet, the idea that the whole world is now within the reach of our fingertips. And we can connect to anyone in any part of the world at any time. This is a new phenomenon. This is something which perhaps our ancestors would have thought was some kind of miracle. Unimaginable. And we call all of this, or the modern world considers all of this to be progress. The question is, progress towards what? And where does this progress end? Does it have a goal? Or is it just, as I suggested, a self-perpetuating process? That modernization has a life of its own. And in fact, this is something I want to discuss, that we are no longer the masters of modernization. Modernization has become our master. So we are actually slaves, you might say, of this system. So this progress, we don't really know exactly where it will go. And modernization in and of itself is neither good nor bad. It's a neutral process, you might say, because there are benefits and there are dangers. There are risks and there are potential rewards from this process. But the question, what we need to address is, as I said, where is it going, and how will we be changed by it? Or will we be able to master it? We've already seen that all of these processes that are part of modernization have led to some very dire consequences. One of these is the question of poverty and sustainability. This is the dark side of urbanization. Nearly 1 billion of the world's population today live in slums. They live in places that no human being would want to live. For example, in this part of the Indian city of Mumbai. But we see this pattern repeated all around the world. This is also globalization. It's the globalization of misery and of human suffering as well. So there are rewards and there are costs. You might say that the ideology behind this is one of consumerism. That is the fuel of the modern economy and the modern way of life. We are told that the more we buy, the more we consume, the better we will be, the happier we will be. If one is good, then 100 must be better. But that's not always true. That's not always true. So that's something we have to examine, because we are becoming classified as consumers. This has become our first identity. We've given up our human identity to become a statistic or to become a number. And I don't hear many people protesting this. I don't hear many people complaining about this. When did we become numbers? When did we become less than human? And with this consumption, I found this image on the internet as well. You know, what are we becoming? Is this our evolution? Is this progress? Or is this, we might say, this is de-evolution, as the Quran says. Allah says that we have created humanity in the best of forms. And then we reduce them to the lowest of the low, except for those, pardon my typographical error, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, and for them is a reward without limit. So, the Quran has already predicted this outcome. You know, that we would rise, that we were created in the best of forms, and that our progress can also become regressive. Now, the modern world, in its most neutral form, is a blend of tradition and innovation. Things are changing. There's always this, perhaps a tension, but there's also a kind of collaboration. As you can see, certain traditions can easily be blended with innovation, and perhaps that's as I said, that's of neutral value, not good, not bad. It's just a fact. But when we look at some of the problems created by modernization, I want to go back to the early 20th century. The French sociologist Emile Durkheim observed 4 trends in modern society, and this was about 100 years ago. So you can imagine, I mean, if he was observing these then, how much more advanced are these trends today? First, he said that traditional social systems, connected by family, community, and religion, are being replaced by a contractual order dominated by private interests and money. So the things that used to link human beings, natural connections of family, where you lived, your common livelihood, you know, a community might be organized around agriculture, for example. And by the shared faith and belief and practice of religion, these things have been replaced. And new relationships have developed, and mostly these are dominated by what we call private interests. And by that we're really talking about money. And this is directly related to the system that we call capitalism. The second point that he noticed, he said that previously morals and behavior were sanctioned by religion. But now, new ideas have stressed reason over faith, and a desire for happiness in this life over any hope or fear of heaven and hell. So there has been a replacement of the essential values and the essential motivation for why we do things, why we do what we consider to be right and what we avoid what we consider to be wrong. Third, he saw a rise in democratic masses and powerful central states. Okay, so countries, nation states have become more important, as have the voice of the people. That might be a very positive development. As I said, we're not judging this as being good or bad. I'm just looking at the trends together with Durkheim. And he said that this change has created a change in the nature of social control. Individuals are losing their old moral authorities like family, community, and religion. And they are seeking guidance from political parties, mass movements, and the state, from the government itself. And finally, this is the one that I want to look at closely. The new freedom of individuals presents both opportunity and risk. Greater prosperity and self-realization, maybe those are good things. But there's also loneliness and personal isolation. We've been uprooted from our traditional communities, and now we're forced to create new communities where there really isn't any organic or natural connection between people. And this has created a sense of alienation. We are alienated from the land, we are alienated from our families, and perhaps from a religious perspective, we could say we are alienated from nature, and from the universe, and from the creator of the universe. And so studies have examined what might be the most significant cause of depression in modern society. And you can see, well, since this is mostly an economic system, financial difficulties actually dominate over the others, but you can also see family and relationship complexity. So maybe there have always been problems in families, but now that the family is no longer the central social unit, family relationships have become even more difficult. And what kind of relationships are we going to replace the family relationship with? It's a big question. Social problems. Social problems are really just an extension of those problems of relationships. People don't really feel like they belong together. They're forced into these uncomfortable circumstances. And finally, technology. Technology is recognized as being not only a sign of progress and something that benefits us, but it actually can be a significant cause of depression as well. Because ironically, the technology which is supposed to bring us together actually pulls us apart. You know this, if you've ever ridden on the MTR at rush hour, when people should be talking to each other, it's actually sometimes silent, because everybody is isolated in their own world with this smartphone that makes us so stupid. Now, the traditional conflict between modernity and religion can be seen as a kind of dichotomy. You know, these two sides that have come to be seen as irreconcilable. Now, modernity has criticized religion. Okay? Part of modernity is a process of secularization. And secularization means moving away from traditional religious ways of looking at the world and also religious behaviors. And so, from the modern perspective, let's take a look at these dichotomies. Modernity sees itself as progressive. And it looks at religion, it looks at religion as backward. Okay, so there are these two opposites. Modernity sees itself as sophisticated. You'll have to follow me. See, technology is sometimes a problem. Sophisticated, and religion is seen as primitive. Modernity sees itself as scientific, and it views religion as superstitious. Modernity sees itself as rational, and religion, of course, the opposite, irrational. Modernity sees itself as egalitarian, and religion is seen as hierarchical. And of course, that's considered to be a negative thing. And finally, religion sees itself as free. I'm really sorry you can't see this as I intended, but it sees itself as free, whereas religion is seen as oppressive. Now we can flip this, and I'm sure we're going to have the same problems with the format, but anyway. Religion then responds to modernity. Religion says it is moral, that it creates a moral world. Modernity, it looks at as amoral, or worse, immoral. Either it has no morals, or it has the wrong morals. Religion is certain. Modernity is considered to be relativistic. So there is a crisis of truth in the modern world. Part of this is that when we're faced with diversity, and there are many different opinions of what the truth is, we don't have a single authority that will say, no, this distinguishes truth from error. So religion sees modernity as relativistic and, perhaps worse, lacking truth. Religion sees itself as guided. It sees modernity as confused or astray. Religion, I can't even read my own, sees itself as individual. Religion sees itself as communal. And it sees modernity as being so highly individualized that it leads to selfishness. Religion is pure, and according to religious perspective, modernity is corrupt. And finally, religion sees itself as structured. But the modern world, because of its confusion and its relative values, it somehow is regarded by religious people as being chaotic. Now, it's true that we live in a world of many religions, many different faith communities, many different beliefs, values. But in fact, the world of religion, the various religions in the world, in some ways have more in common with each other than they do with this new modern way of looking at the world. And so, we're focusing today on the relationship of Islam and modernity. And we do know that in the media, there is this very clear opposition that has been constructed, that somehow Muslims are not modern, that they are backward and primitive. Now, of course, originally the idea of modernity and the secularization that came with it was a Western phenomenon. And so first, modern thinkers actually targeted not Islam or any other non-Western religion, they targeted Christianity first. So Christianity was the first focus of the modern critique of religion. But then Christianity in its own way modified, and also Western society became increasingly secularized. And so once this ideology began to spread to the rest of the world, other foreign religions, when I say foreign, non-Western religions, came to be the focus of the critique of religion. And actually the non-Western religions became the symbol of the anti-modern, the backward, the regressive. And Islam, perhaps because Muslims have tended to cling to their traditional beliefs more than other societies, Islam became one of the central targets of this modern critique of religion. And so there seemed to be this irreconcilable conflict between Islam and modernity. Now, I'm not sure that there really is such an irreconcilable difference, and I'll talk about that towards the end. But the fact is that it exists, and it's a matter of perspective. So as this image so clearly and so obviously suggests, there's a question of suspicion and mistrust between so-called modern people and so-called traditional religious people, in this case, Muslims. And Muslims in turn, because modernity was first associated with Westernization, there has grown an antipathy or an animosity between some Muslims and the very idea of the modern world, because they associate it with not only with the idea of secularism, but they also associate it with a history of domination by Western powers. So Westernization and modernization have become quite entangled, even though now modernization is a global process. Now, some of the fears that non-Muslims may have, especially in the Western world, is this idea that Islam, as backward as it is, from their perspective, is at the same time growing at unprecedented rates, and this is a danger to the very modern way of life. So we see the facts and the figures that are spread throughout the Western world. France says that there are 1.8 French children per French family, whereas Muslims have an 8.1 number. Whether this is true or not, these are the numbers that are promoted. Similarly, in the UK, since 1970, the Muslim population has grown 30 times, from 82,000 to 2.5 million. Okay, in the Netherlands, 50% of all newborns are Muslims. Actually, this is not true. This is not true, but these are numbers that are quoted. In Belgium, 25% of the population are Muslims. Also not true. Germany, the fall, this was actually a German member of parliament who said this. The fall of the German population can no longer be stopped. Germany will be a Muslim state by the year 2050. There are currently 52 million Muslims in Europe. That number is expected to double in the next 20 years. Okay, well, some of these are real numbers and some of them are exaggerations. But what it points to is this idea, this mistrust and this fear, and the fear-mongering that somehow the growth of Islam represents the fall of civilization, the fall of modern Western civilization. So we see these kind of rallies throughout the Western world. Here in German it says, "Stop Islamization." Even here, in local newspapers, after the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris, the same question was being asked. Is there an Islamization in China? Is this taking place? Well, you all can answer this, I'm sure. But the point is the perspective. The perspective that somehow the growth of Islam represents a threat to the modern world and to civilization itself. Well, this cartoon actually, to me, shows a different perspective. And that is that civilization is actually being attacked from two different sides. Right? Civilization is something that we all share. But in fact, Western consumerism on the one side and Islamic fundamentalism on the other side are both enemies of civilization. And actually, civilization is our common human heritage. Okay? It doesn't matter whether it is Islamic civilization or Western Christian civilization or Buddhist or Hindu or Chinese civilization. These are all civilization. And I would argue that religion has always been the cornerstone of civilization throughout history. And it's only the modern secular trend which has, in some ways, reversed this perennial history, this history that has always been the case. And in Islam, we know this. We know that the Arabic word for civilization, right, Mediniya, is derived from the word for city, Medina. And if we look at the etymology of Medina, we know that at the very heart of the Medina is deen. Okay? So religion is at the very heart of civilization. This is an Islamic perspective. But we have this idea, forwarded by Samuel Huntington in the 1990s, that civilizations are actually clashing with each other. And that yes, while it is recognized that Islam has its own distinct civilization, and the West has its civilization, and Latin America has its civilization, Russia has its civilization, in some ways, this thesis of the clash of civilizations that Huntington proposed actually goes against the very ideals of globalization. Because what he's saying is that these civilizations can never actually be reconciled with each other. They will always be competing, they will always be fighting. And therefore, as you may know the map, he has said that the world can be divided in this way. But these lines are far too neat. They're too clean. Borders don't look like this. You know, when we look at a place like Hong Kong, for example, that we live in, we know that there aren't neat lines between this civilization and that civilization. You know, there isn't just a district where only Muslims reside and where only Chinese people reside and only Pakistanis and Indians are there. We all live together. And whether it's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing, whether it's by design or whether it's just by the forces of nature and society, this is the reality. So this is what we have to come to accept. And we can't really accept a world that is divided into different realms. Of course, you will recognize the black flag of the so-called caliphate of the Islamic State, and how it too wishes to divide the world into these different civilizations that cannot be reconciled with each other. And actually, this is an old, and again, pardon the Arabic script didn't appear, but this is an old way of looking at the world, dividing it into, on the one hand, the Dar al-Islam, and on the other hand, the Dar al-Harb, as if Harb is the only alternative to Islam. Conflict or war is the only thing that we see outside of Islam. And in fact, I mean, this idea may have its precedence in history. For example, in the Crusades, this battle between Western Christianity and Eastern Islam. But even in the same period, for example, in Spain, in medieval Spain, we see what was called in Spanish the convivencia, the living together. So civilizations do not have to clash. Civilizations can also collaborate. And even if we look at the scientific theory of evolution, Darwin talks at great length about the competition that fuels survival and evolution. But it's also within the nature of humans and other animals to collaborate with each other as well. So we don't have to see this as an either-or choice. Sometimes we compete, sometimes we collaborate. And when we compete, it doesn't mean that we also always have to resort to the most violent or destructive methods. We can also compete in a civilized way. And that's why even in Islamic thought, besides the Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, there's also what's called the Dar al-Sulh, the abode of concord. And this actually goes back when we look at the example of the early Muslim community and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see that there were different times when conflict or harb was called for, and other times where concord or agreement could be achieved. We also know that there's another legal category, the Dar al-Amn, or the abode of security, which allows Muslims to live in peace in a non-Muslim environment, in a modern society, for example. Muslims can be part of a modern, multicultural, pluralistic society. Now there are these trends. For example, the United Nations, even the government in Beijing, is trying to promote this idea of a shared civilization that we all have, that we all are investors in, stakeholders. And I think that personally, if I may make this editorial comment, that's a much more positive way of looking at things, and probably a more productive alternative than the idea of constant warfare and competition. And as I said, Islam already has built into it the mechanism for globalization, the mechanism for harmony, the mechanism for respect of life. The Hajj, as we know, is the world's largest religious event annually. And when you look at the people, all the values that have been embraced in the modern world, the idea of communalism, the idea of diversity, but also equality. These are all already represented in Islam. And in fact, if Muslims just followed the traditions of Islam and adapted them to modern life, they really wouldn't have to search outside of Islam for the answers to many of these problems. You know, this idea of diversity, when we look, I just chose images just to share with you. I mean, the face of Islam is not one face. It's not monolithic. Islam is not just one thing. I mean, the list goes on. Whether we agree with all of these representations of Islam or not, the fact is that Islam is diverse, Islam is young, Islam is mobile. You know that the average Muslim today, actually, if you look statistically, the average Muslim is a 17-year-old girl from Bangladesh. That's the average Muslim. Because it shows you that Islam is widespread, it is diverse, it is certainly not dominated by one gender or another. So the average Muslim, statistically, is a young girl from Bangladesh. So it shows you that Islam is everything that anyone might say about Islam. There may be some truth there, but they are also definitely overlooking many facts. These are all Muslims. No more and no less. In their own way, they may feel that they are caught between different cultures. Some Muslims are angry. We've seen these faces too. But what about this? This is actually a protest of Moroccan women against Al-Qaeda. Okay, so Islam is... I won't finish the sentence. Islam is. Islam is. You can finish the sentence. Islam, and any word you provide will probably be true. Muslims are. So, I'll finish the range of images, and then let's focus on this. So the world's population today is roughly 7 billion people. Of those, 1.5 billion are Muslims. So Muslims must play a role in the global world, in the global society, and what we would call modern society. To think otherwise is to actually segregate the world, and that's just not possible anymore because of the interconnectedness that is the result of modernity and technology and urbanization and globalization. So again, we see where Muslims live. They live everywhere. The only reason some of these parts of the map are white is not because there aren't Muslims there, it's just because nobody's gone there to count them. They are there, I promise you. And we can see how, Islam actually, more than anything, is actually an Asian religion. Ideas of dividing the world into East and West, actually we see Muslims are everywhere, and therefore those are outdated modes of looking at the world as well. The modern world doesn't rely on geography anymore. The modern world is connected beyond geography. But we do have a problem within Islam as well. Not all Muslims have embraced the fact that they are part of a larger global society and a larger global community. I mean, Islam will dominate the world, okay, perhaps, inshallah. But in what way? Freedom can go to hell? Why are those two phrases put together? And it's a mistake on the part of some Muslims, because we shouldn't allow love of tradition to blind us to the fact that the world is constantly changing also. And if we don't change along with the world, then we will be left behind. We will be left out. And there will never be peace. That is true. That is a guarantee. That if Muslims are not adaptive to the changes in the world, they will not have a place, they will not have a place at this banquet table that modernity has to offer us. And yes, Salafism, yes, there's no question that we honor the righteous ancestors, that we honor the Salaf. But honoring them doesn't mean we have to go back to the 7th century. That is not possible. And in fact, that is what I call one of the fundamental flaws of fundamentalism, whether it's in Islam or any other religion. This idea of going back to a golden age. First of all, do we know our history well enough to be able to say that there was a perfect age? Nothing was ever perfect. Do you think that the Prophet ﷺ and his community didn't face challenges? Do you think that everything was perfect, even inside that community? No. And what I really want to point out is that fundamentalist ideas and methods are always products of centuries of evolution, and they appear in a modern context. Fundamentalism itself is a product of the modern world. It is a response to change, but a rejection of change. And therefore, fundamentalism is generally self-contradictory. In fact, what we have to admit the reality of multiculturalism, of diversity. We have to accept that there are other religious communities and non-religious communities in the world. And the only way to deal with some of the world's problems is by accepting that reality. The world's problems are global. Global poverty. And if you look at the places that are poorest, you'll see in many cases they also overlap with the Muslim world. Similarly, the deaths from climate change, global climate change, overlaps in some extraordinary way with global Islam. And that is something that Muslims have to think about and have to address. They have to see that, yes, we have values within our faith, within the teachings of Islam, that can actually be solutions to some of these global problems. But only if we also collaborate with other people. Other religious communities also have things that we can learn from. Other non-religious communities also share some common values. So we have to find those common values. The fact of the matter is, and I'll finish with this metaphor, we are all in the same boat. In English we have this expression, we're all in the same boat. It means that we have a common condition. Now the problem is that this boat is like a luxury liner, maybe the Titanic. And some people live on the upper deck. And there they have all of these comforts and luxuries. But the majority of our population lives beneath the upper deck, in the bowels of the ship. They don't have access to clean air or clean water. They don't have access to the very basic, fundamental needs of life. And if by accident one of them were to make a hole in the ship just to get some fresh air, could we blame them? But if they do that, what happens? It doesn't matter whether you have the first class ticket or the lowest class ticket. We will all go down together. This is our shared destiny. So we're all in the same boat. That is really the message of modern society, for good or for evil. And thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you, Professor Frankel. 现在我简单的就把就是副教授刚才这个讲座关于伊斯兰与现代社会一个简单的摘要。副教授的那个演讲是从几个方面去展开的。第一呢，就是首先呢，就是说那个现代化，这个现象或者是过程。现代化呢是一个不断持续的过程。那当中呢，有正面的一方面就是说有现代化带来了进步我们看到就是在这个现代化的过程呢，就是我们人类社会在工业化、都市化和全球化。但是呢，在这一过程的同时间呢，也存在就是说一些问题。比如是贫穷，比如是那个我们的地球能够持续发展吗？第二点呢，就是现代性这个现代化的过程呢，又好像被就是看为跟宗教传统宗教是相反的，两者是对立的那么这个是怎么产生的呢？就是现代化呢，就是就是给传统带来了很大的挑战，就是打破了传统的生活方式、传统的文化。传统呢被现代化的支持者呢认为是落后的、原始的、非理性的、压迫的那相反呢，现代化就是代表就认为自己呢是这些的反面，就是好的一方面进步的代表的是进步、理性的带来了平等。那同时间，传统宗教呢又为自己辩护就是认为就是传统宗教是觉得呢自己是就是有那个道德操守的，是拥有真理的，是就是注重这个群体价值的。那么相反呢，现代化又带来了那个道德的衰败，就是没有什么是确定的，没有什么真理不真理。就是带来了就是个人化个人的自由、个人价值是最重要的。那么往往呢，就是现代和这个 传统呢，好像就是一个对立面一样。那么当中呢，就是这个对于宗教呢，现代化对宗教的批评呢，就是非常的尖锐的。这是其实呢，就是从西方开始，这个现代化的过程是在西方开始就是过去200、300年，是一个不断的过程，然后呢传播到在这个过程当中呢，同时呢从西方传播到世界各地。那么开始的时候在西方对就是基督教就是这个现代化的力量，就是对西方的那个传统宗教，也就是基督教进行了批评。那么随着这个现代化传播到其他的地方的时候，就是现代化呢，同时间也对其他的所有的宗教，这个矛头也指向所有的宗教，其中包括伊斯兰，那么从在这个现代化的过程当中呢，同时带来了世俗主义，就是这个宗教在传统社会的地位受到了质疑穆斯林对西方的穆斯林呢，由于这个对于这个现代化，由于现代化呢是在西方开始的所以呢而穆斯林世界呢也很长的一段时间受到那个西方殖民主义的压迫，所以呢有些穆斯林呢就是对于这个现代化就是有迟疑那么到了现在呢，伊斯兰呢往往呢就是被西方视为对人类文明的威胁其实我们人类文明的受到了2方面的攻击，一方面呢就是我们看到现代社会一种消费主义消费主义往往是驱动着现代社会的发展另外一方面就是关于到我们的我们再讲下去就是关于这个伊斯兰的方面我们转一下就是看学者们对于文明的一些论说，就是亨廷顿他提出的人类就是那个文明冲突论但是另外一方面我们也见到这个全球化的过程。那么全球化这2个就是对于人类文明的将来有不同的看法一方面认为是人类文明没办法就是说充满矛盾的，另外一方面呢就是说我们这个全球化就是希望就是把人类文明是带向统一。但是呢这2种说法呢其实都不太符合时事。我们往往看到时事文明之间，首先文明哪怕是在一个文明当中也不是单一的，它往往是多元的文明之间呢，不同文明之间呢是可以存在着竞争，但是也存在着合作的关系而从伊斯兰来看伊斯兰是肯定世界的多元人类是平等的人与人之间是平等，人类世界是多元的伊斯兰提出的是要那个社会公益，要尊重生命，这些呢都是普世的价值世界是在不断的改变之中，那么呢我们穆斯林呢也要与时俱进不能够落后于世界的发展 我们呢应该就是跟其他人，其实其他的族群或者是其他的宗教，我们是有一些共同的价值的，大家是有一些共同的价值观，我们是可以求同就是一起跟其他人一起的合作，去解决我们人类世界的问题。在我们穆斯林就是在世界当中是当就是好大的部分而且呢，世界各地的都有穆斯林所以我们呢就是应该就是说跟其他的族群、其他人一起呢，就是共同去解决人类的社会的问题。穆斯林当中呢有一些就是原教旨主义者这些原教旨主义者呢，他们是不接受改变，世界改变是一个可以说是一个就是定律，世界是在不断的改变。但是呢，就是原教旨主义者呢，他们是不接受那个改变他们是抵抗改变，这是一个误区那么最后呢，作为一个总结，就是说，我们穆斯林跟其他人就是说，世界的不同的国家或者不同的族群，其实我们都是在这个地球上，我们就好像是同坐一条船，我们是有共同的命运所以呢，我们应该是共同的携手合作去解决现在我们世界面对的很多的问题。